We have a sense of self-priority, which we call selfishness. When it comes to the crunch, we try to survive as a priority, personally. There are some astonishing people that actually put other people's survival before themselves. And we're certainly impressed by such, but not necessarily quite up to that ourselves. Depends on who we are, I suppose, and what our training is and expectations. I think it's necessary that we have this inbuilt self-interest of putting self first, but that in a very rough and ready way helps survival, especially in a society where there is no society, no civilization. It's best to kill the wild beast that's attacking you rather than let it kill you. If you're of the opinion that you let it kill you, such opinions are not held by many of the living in your society. They get wiped out quickly. So, a self-interest was endemic in a very non-civilized society. In a civilized society, we can find that diminution, a reduction of self-interest, can be extremely beneficial in cooperative behavior, and it is that cooperative behavior that brings prosperity. We're fairly selfish in our approach in this world in general, at least in some ways, and a market economy seems to be the optimal solution, where self-interest will at least motivate people to produce, and the production is something that the community more or less needs. Housing and food and protection and whatever. We retreat, incidentally, into a family situation, traditionally, where cooperation and selflessness was appreciated, valued, and rewarded, I suppose. And on that micro level, perhaps we find some compensation against the, if you like, harsh realities of the marketplace. And of course, in the 21st century, where the family is diminishing in its presence, may lead to some repercussions of instability in the whole society, because we're not getting much experience or training in selflessness, except from what the political stroke economic society is that we're living in. Which may compensate to some extent. Not sure. Jury's still out. We'll find out, won't we? It's interesting that the concept of God being Father becomes weaker in as far as fathers are not necessarily on the scene now with children. You could argue, well, they never were much. They were always, especially for the poor, desperately occupied with the work situation and out of the house. And the father always was rather distant. Perhaps in the Hebrew Judaic culture of 2,000 years ago and earlier, fathers were much more on the premises, I mean, unless they were in the army or something. Actually, I think the Romans had the first professional army. People may have gone off to war in every society, but they weren't permanently enlisted in it. And if we think of some sort of, quotes, rural culture, well, dad is around, and the kids are working with him, they're not going off to school. So you had much more contact with not just mum, but also dad. And the decline of the family may be not just a cause, but a consequence as well of, and is, I think, of this modern mobility and mobility of location of the family, so that you keep losing all the extended part of it. Without the extended family, there wasn't the stability of the nucleuses within it, husband and wives. And without that stability, of course, even that collapses. And we got the 20th century one-parent family towards the end of the 20th century. And the next step could be the no-parent family. The Nazi experiment in that regard wasn't very successful. You could say they got it wrong, there were ways of doing it right, but, well, we're not very sympathetic to that sort of political approach, are we? Any more than we're sympathetic to the communist approach. Communist approach is interesting because the commune, I found, provides more parents for the commune that I know of, and supplied kids to a school I used to teach at. But I wonder if you could end up just not cared for if you were a problem child. Perhaps you get less problem children in communities, though. That did seem to be the case. I really do think that community is the way to go. But it's at least got to be paralleled by some sort of spirituality, really, of loving concern for each other, else the community collapses into something that's pretty worldly. And dysfunctional. In some ways we see the 21st century as, yes, the problem of isolation, but also the problem of everything being dysfunctional in some sense, not what it appears, and not achieving what it's supposed to achieve. Or is that just a negative view? What do you think? Thank you, Dad. But there was another reason for self-interest, not just from the point of view of the animal's survival on the planet, regardless of civilization, so to speak, but also because, well, I think it runs like this. If we're here in order to experience a freedom, to practice, if necessary, what we truly value at heart, must have some sense of an apparent reality of this being the only life you have, and you could waste it by doing something that actually destroys your life, and you really don't value at all if you think earnestly enough about it, or if you experience doing it and finding out. So for argument's sake, I might get to the end of my life plagued by an addiction that I cannot or haven't managed to throw off. And I'm faced with the reality of my life being ruined in this way, assuming it is ruined, of course. And this is now the end, and there's nothing else. Do you see, if there is any life after death, and if there is any memory or something carried forward from this life, one can certainly imagine that it, as I say certainly, one can imagine that it's highly likely to be that which you've gained as regards your values, your basic who you are. In other words, if the who you are is continuous, the values will now be changed. You are utterly against addiction because it's wrecked your life and cost you everything. And that is a taste, a lesson in the reality, perhaps, of the dilemma that God is faced with. And that's a very strange way of thinking about things. We don't think of God as being in a fix. But let me just pursue it for a moment. He wants you to have eternal life in heaven, in a glorious place. But he can't have you there because of certain longings that you have that will wreck the joint. So he sends you to earth where you may experience the outcome of these longings, if indeed you don't learn just by observation what the outcome is, and thereby gain, if it's realistic enough, this experience on earth, this dream here that he's running of your life in this place. If you find your values abhorrent enough, one or two of your values abhorrent enough, because they've caused this awful situation that you found yourself in, you see, I can't have eternal life in a perfect place unless I'm not going to wreck the place with who I am. In other words, for instance, I can't have my creative freedom if my creative freedom is going to be a menace to all heaven. So I'm here where I may train, learn, come to realize. And to make this a vivid lesson, it may well take a certainty within me that when I die, I'm dead and gone. And I don't want to waste this life. And I have wasted this life because I followed one of my values. For argument's sake, it was driving fast cars. So I haven't done that, okay, but you know. And you know, it ended up, say, with an accident, or I hurt someone, or I hurt myself, that wrecked my life one way or another. And you know, the idea of the equivalent of whatever the equivalent might be in heaven of fast cars, presuming I can imagine anything in heaven, there's no way I'm going to imagine living like that. It's changed me, you see, such that I become more appropriate to being in heaven. And to do that, I must experience this life as if it were my only reality. If, on the other hand, I'm quite clear, well, if it's only temporary, I'm going to go to heaven anyway, that might make me a bit more casual here, too casual perhaps. Or if I thought, oh, when you're dead, I might well think, well, that's a terrible waste then to have spent it. You know, I'm back for the rest of my life because I drove too fast. So, uncertainty, at least, one way and another, may be a necessary condition for you to experience freedom and the cost of it. But it must be in an environment in which it's not truly a cost to attend me. I mean, you could come back and have another shot at the lesson, for instance, here or somewhere else, perhaps. Whatever alternatives, you know, my father's house of many mansions. All is not lost, and everything could be gained, in that I learned my lesson, and my values have changed, and I'm now mature, spiritually, ready for heaven. What do you think of that scenario? If it is the best scenario, perhaps indeed that is the reality of things. But that's why we're here, and so on and so forth. But in the uncertainty, of course, we still need you to stay here long enough, and for people to live here long enough to have this experience. And in a world in which, for argument's sake, there's good and evil, good and bad, or whatever you like to call it, we need you to be highly motivated to continue living and not die. And if you think there's nothing after death, you might be incredibly motivated to value life. Which of course is what you should be doing in heaven, valuing it so much that you stream out any value that's not consistent with heaven. But perhaps we were not like that, and we still had these longings in us. So God creates the universe here as it is, with uncertainty and a priority of self-survival, that you do have long enough here to learn the lessons. You don't just sacrifice your life lightly by any means. And especially in uncertainty and ignorance, it's not going to be too much of a rational decision you're staying here in the meantime. It had better be something that's almost endemic, built into you, that you avoid death so strongly, especially your own death. And as I say, there are exceptions, of course. You might well put the wife first, and the wife might well put the children first, and so on. I've never felt I'd put the wife before the children before the wife. I always felt, oh no. And I think that's the airline steward policy too, isn't it? Put your own mask on first, oxygen mask in an emergency, and then the children, not the other way around. Because of course their survival depends on you, the adult. So you must be living to help them survive, or else you all die. So the priority is your own mask first. Now, whether that's genuinely applicable in the situation we're really in the world, I'm not sure, but interesting point. Again, worth considering, isn't it? But at the end of the day, you will not know. It will still be a theory in uncertainty. A theory is ever in uncertainty. It's not knowing. That's certainty, and there's not much that we're certain of in this world, if anything. On close examination, we may be behaving as if we're certain and quite deluded in it. There you go. Thank you, Dad.